This is Deb Alexander, your host of Are You Real Government? I've got a great show coming up for you right after these words from our partners.
Hey everyone, this is Mike.
And this is Brian of Fellowship Home Loans.
Many things make us different, but what do our clients say?
We can close your loan in weeks, not months like other lenders. They love our low rates and, of course, our personalized one-on-one approach.
Call us today at 800-804-SAVE or online at fellowshiphomeloans.com.
Government is everywhere, personally, nationally, globally, and heavenly. Welcome to Are You Real Government, the premier media outlet where we discuss what's going on around the world and how to release God's governance, the kingdom, into it. Each week, we'll be equipping you with kingdom understanding and giving you the inside track to government leaders around the globe. Now get ready to get real about government with Are You Real Government?
What in the world is going on, and more importantly, what in your world is going on? This is Deb Alexander, spiritual advisor to the influential and your host of Are You Real Government. Don't forget that you can catch John Fuller, the founder and president of the Are You Real family of podcasts, and his show, Are You Real Purpose, every Wednesday on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm super excited to bring you this interview today with Dr. Noah Manyika, a man after God's own heart who is running for president in the country of Zimbabwe. Sit back and enjoy the show. Today, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Noah Manyika, who is running for the presidential office of the country of Zimbabwe under the political party of the Build Zimbabwe Alliance. Dr. Manyika, thank you so much for making time in the heat of your campaign to be on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Deb.
We recently had one of your campaign advisors, Chantel Irish, on the show, and she did an excellent job and really honored who you are and the platform that you have built. And as a result, I know many of our listeners have been looking forward to this interview. So could you start by telling the people a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, growing up, I was one of the African kids that you see on video, who used to go to school without shoes, who used to study by candlelight. And I grew up in Rhodesia. It was segregated when we were growing up. But I also grew up in a home where my parents were people of faith. And in spite of what we were living through, we always had hope, and also thank God for the foresight of the missionaries, who went to Africa, many decades ago and built schools in places where you wouldn't even think that they should build schools. So I grew up that way. I grew up, in a house of faith and believing that nothing could stop us, even though the situation around us was really negative. So in 1980, when the country became independent, I was a young man coming out of high school, and like many young people, we had a lot of hope. And at that moment for many African countries is an exciting time, as you can imagine, when you think, well, there are even more possibilities for us if we throw off the colonial yoke, as it were. But as you know, in most African countries now, we're 50 years after the beginning of the decolonization process, what you find, hopes that were never fulfilled. I grew up even in that situation myself, of hopes which were never fulfilled. And after several years of just agonizing about what I needed to do to play my part, to make sure that we also, as Africans, could be what God wanted us to be. I then decided a couple of years ago that I needed to dive in and participate actively in bringing about freedom, not just independence, but freedom to our country.
I love that. So talk to us a little bit about the platform that you have built in order to be able to do what it is that you feel God is calling you to do. I'd love to hear the story behind how the Build Zimbabwe Alliance was formed.
Yeah, so, I can take you back to, even my early years. We're getting an education, but as you can imagine, growing up in a segregated environment, our education was really not supposed to free us, but we're supposed to be educated enough to service in an ecosystem. And then we became independent, and a lot of us were asking ourselves, okay, what's the purpose even of my education? And there are a lot of Africans who run away from their own countries because they don't find in those countries an opportunity to actually participate in, determining the direction of their country and building it. So they go elsewhere. And like many others, I spent a lot of time in the diaspora, and agonizing, and I had a lot of opportunities in the diaspora. I was a missionary actually in North Carolina for 22 years with my wife. I had the opportunity to build institutions, to build broken lives, to do all those things that anyone who is a child of God and has been given capacity by God, to do great stuff. I was able to do that in a country which was not my own. And then I got to a point also beginning to ask myself, okay, but which country did God give me as an inheritance? And you know what? My inheritance is Zimbabwe, as broken as it is and so on. And I got to that moment of saying, oh, you know what? I need to go back home and participate in determining the direction of my country and building it. So what happened is that in 2016, I also had a really God moment where, really God spoke to me strongly, and pretty much said, if you don't do what you're supposed to be doing, I'll require the blood of the next generation on your hands. And that was, for me, a very, very important moment. And so I started messaging. It really just started as me messaging my displeasure at what was going on in Zimbabwe and putting it on social media. And all of a sudden, there were people from all over the world organizing themselves, because the mantra that I was using in my messaging was, let's build Zimbabwe. This is not about politics. This is not about all of that. This is about really building a nation. And can we respond to that cause, to the call of that cause, to go back home, some of us, or wherever we are, to actually participate in building a nation. So that platform grew out of that message. And then people started self-organizing in different countries. And in short order, we had about 200 WhatsApp groups of people who actually say, we subscribe to your values. We believe what you're saying, and we want to be part of this movement. And then by October of 2016, it had gathered so much momentum outside and in the country that we then actually registered as a political party. Now, even as I say that, our desire, it was not to be a political party, as it were, and we still describe ourselves as a platform rather than a political party. We are a platform for Zimbabweans to work together to rebuild their country, and they don't have to spend a lot of time in the political arena. As long as you have it within you to actually make a contribution to changing the lives of your people, to rebuilding communities and so on, we are a platform for that. So that's what we're doing, and that's the platform that we have actually presented to the Zimbabwean people, and we're excited about what's going on.
That's so good. You said so many things that are noteworthy. I love the idea of the party versus the platform, because a party is always divisive, but a platform has the ability to lift everybody up. So, man, what a piece of gold that is that you've dug out there. And I love how you took hope and turned it into a plan. Man, I feel like so many people just live in hope and never strategize. And wow, I honor you for that.
Well, thank you so much, and you're so right, Dub. I think this is where a lot of people, particularly in the church, we're very hopeful when we are in the four buildings of the church, and then when we confront reality outside, sometimes we struggle, and sometimes it's because of the theology that we feed ourselves. We actually don't realize that when we read those stories, like the story of David and Goliath, that was a very practical thing. If Goliath had prevailed, Israel would have been under political subjection, economic subjection, and spiritual subjection. And, so David had to turn his faith into actual action against this problem that, so if you don't do that, it's a, then what does that mean? What does our faith really mean? So, thank you for saying that. And we're really trying to model our campaign and everything that we do, even on the heroes of our faith, people who obeyed God in the way impossible situations, but they obeyed and God came through for them.
I love that. Speaking of the platform that you're building, on the show that I did with Chantel Irish, I shared your manifesto, and I'll make sure that that's available again on the show notes of this episode. But I'd love to hear from you yourself. What are some pieces of that document, perhaps a couple of parts that you are most passionate about?
Well, in fact, we have a 10-point plan in our manifesto, which talks about the things that we're going to do. It's not an exhaustive list because, as you can imagine, you can't put everything that you're going to do, but these are some of our priorities as a platform. But before we even get to the 10-point plan, there's something that we wrote about in the introduction of the manifesto, which is about, building an uncommon social contract. And what has happened in the past 38 years is that Zimbabwe has really been a divided nation. And you can imagine that people then end up with vested interest in their own little corners and so on. We absolutely felt that we had one common enemy, which was the system that Robert Mugabe had built. But even then, even after you remove Robert Mugabe, the idea that Zimbabweans is going to be easy for Zimbabweans to work together it can't be further from the truth. We need the kind of leadership that is going to bring people together. We have people who have various issues that they're disgruntled because of the things that really happened to them. So, for instance, we have the white community which was dispossessed of land. We have the Ndebelés in one of the regions who were really targeted for something that really almost amounted to genocide. We have all those people who were hurt during the 2008 elections and so on and so forth. And then you have the vendors, those people who are the urban poor, who are sitting on the street corners and selling their wares because they're victims of economic dysfunction. And then we have people in the diaspora. So you have so many different interest groups. You have people in the rural areas who constitute 70% of our population. So how do you then actually reconcile the conflicting interests of all these groups? Wow. How do you make sure that you can actually get these different groups to say, this is what is in our common interest? Because for you to create commonwealth and common well-being, you have to have that unique social contract where people agree. These are the fundamental things that unite us. Wow. And for me, manifesto, that's one of the things that I really hope that people read that, the need for a unique social contract and really understand that. Because everything else that follows, everything that is in our 10-point plan really depends on us developing, that unique social contract. And then I can just point out, a couple of things from our 10-point plan. One of the things that we say is that we are going to cut the size of our government because if you look at most African government, they are bloated. There's a bloated bureaucracy. You appoint your aunt and your uncle and your cousin and everybody, actually ends up being in government because you are in government. It has nothing to do with addressing the needs of the people. So you end up with this humongous government. We have committed actually that we are going to cut down the size of government of the executive to 15. We're going to make sure that we're best. Actually, I usually use this statement: a lean meat fighting machine that is going to fight, for the well-being of the Zimbabwean people. That's one thing. And the other one, which I'm most excited about, is how do you actually ensure that a president who is elected is really a president for the whole nation? How do you make sure of that? So a lot of times the president is elected and then all they do is they function from the capital. But you need presidential attention to be attracted to the provinces, because building an economy that is healthy it means actually resuscitating the economies of the different provinces. So we have decided that what we're going to do is that once a month, the president is actually going to set up residency in a province outside of Harare. And when they are in that province, one thing that they will do, it's a working time. So it's not for campaigning or anything. It's actually going to be unconstitutional for them to hold their own party meetings there. This is to actually make sure that you really look at what is going on in that province, what are the needs in that province, look at the business engagement teams that are in that province to see if they're doing their work. And at the end of that working week, you're actually going to give a state of the province address to the whole nation. So this is what this province looks like, and these are the needs that are there. So we have 10 provinces in Zimbabwe. So, it will take 10 months for the president to go around all the provinces. And then after that, at the end of, you give the State of the Nation address, which is informed by your provincial residencies and so on. The following year, when you go back to that province, you are actually looking to see if the goals, the plans that were set in the previous year and during your presidential visit were actually implemented. So, it's a simple thing. You're president for the whole country. You actually make sure that you pay attention to everybody,
Right.
And if you do that, then you actually create a holistic economy. One more thing from the manifesto that I would point out. So when you look at Zimbabwe right now, with 90% unemployment, it's hard to imagine that. We are the 6th largest informal economy in Africa. So most of our people are in the informal sector. It is going to be a huge challenge, to address the needs of 90% unemployed people in the informal sector. But you know what? I'm also quite excited about the opportunity that is there to actually formalize some of the initiatives that have been undertaken by Zimbabweans to actually help themselves. We look at these people and we say they're in the informal economy. But you imagine just how strong and robust an indigenous economy you can build if you address the needs of those people to grow their businesses, for instance. So there's a whole lot of partnership with other countries and financial institutions to actually pour money into the informal sector so that some of these people can actually grow their own businesses and so on. We're not going to be able to go back to the way things were, where, we had companies that came and created mass employment. Even in the United States right now, it's almost a thing of the past, unless it's one of these new kind of economy companies like Facebook or Google or something like that.
Right.
It's really small businesses that actually provide employment and so on. So I'm really excited about that as well.
I like that so much. I love the practical elements of that, and also the built-in accountability, that you're keeping the problem in front of your face so that you're able to really provide the solutions for those people. I really feel like that's a heart of a father for a nation. So
Amen.
really good, really good. So for our people here in the States, can you explain to them the political and the governmental structure of Zimbabwe when it comes to the office of the president and the procedure for elections?
So, that's a great question. So what we have is a president who is elected by everybody. So you have to win by more than 50% at the election. If you win less than 50%, then the two who score the highest go for a rerun. So we have that. So you can actually have someone winning the presidency, but not winning a majority in the legislature, because when people go to vote, they can actually vote for a president from a different party, and they can vote for an MP who comes from another party. So it's actually possible. In fact, earlier on today, I was on a Facebook live program, and I was saying, you know what, it would not be bad, even in our country, to have what is called a divided government, because holding the executive accountable is what we really need going forward. And if they don't think that they have a majority in the legislature as well, that will just rubber stamp every policy that they make, then maybe they will be incentivized to really go out there and be accountable and convince people that their policies are right. So yeah, we have a presidential system, we have a parliamentary system, a parliament which is bicameral. So we have a Senate, and we have members of parliament, which in the United States would be members of Congress, representatives, House representatives.
Yes,
and we have 210 of those legislators, which is a monstrosity really as far as we are concerned, because we are only a country of 16, and that's being generous, between 13, 14 million people, and we have an average of 32 representatives per province, which is insane as far as we're concerned. And a lot of that came out of just the patronage system, people just wanting to have more positions to accommodate their party members. So one of the things that we have even said is that in the event that we are actually elected, we would like to see a reduction in the size of the legislature to 150.
Okay, very well said. So what are some of the greatest challenges that are facing your campaign currently?
Well, as you can imagine, and I'll be very honest with you. We're doing this because we feel that the Lord called us to do this. And when you're on an adventure with God, sometimes He doesn't tell you everything, and sometimes He waits for you to take a step of faith, before the resources become available. You have to walk towards your miracle, and sometimes you don't see it. You're just told to walk in that direction, and then you encounter it. So, like every campaign, we always need more resources than we actually have. So that, that's one of the challenges. But the other challenges, before I even talk about resources, the way that Zimbabwe is set up. Zimbabwe is, like I said earlier, 70% of our people live in the rural areas. And the way that the congressional districts in the US, we call them constituencies in Zimbabwe, the way that they are set up, we have 150 rural and only 60 urban.
Wow.
The rural communities are the least developed, bad roads, bad access, and so on. And for the past 38 years, what that has worked in the favor of the ruling party. And at election time, they go out there and they give people in the rural areas little things and stuff like that. And they are so able to keep these people trapped in poverty. And they use their political machinery to do that and to deny access to other political parties to go there and so on. Now, to be honest with you, as far as I'm concerned, what we are actually fighting for is we're fighting to defeat this thing called poverty. It's a fight that we are in to absolutely eradicate poverty. Now, the Bible tells us that the poor are always going to have, not because we don't fight to actually eradicate poverty, but because you can't force people, even when you've created pathways for people, the pathways of opportunity, you can't force them, right? So the poor are always going to have because of that. But keeping people trapped in poverty for political purposes, as far as we're concerned, is the modern day slavery that we must fight against. And, that fight is a really huge fight. It is a huge fight. And it is not just in Zimbabwe. It's in most African countries. They get their independence. A few people, the elites, are sent to power, and they keep people trapped in poverty. And really, it is the successor to colonialism. It is the modern day slavery. It is. And so one of the biggest challenges for us is making sure that we can really, really reach these people who are in 150 of the constituencies out of 210. The urban communities are fine. It's very easy to access. But the rural communities are a challenge. And we need off-road vehicles. We need so many things to actually get to the rural communities and really begin to educate that rural electorate that, look, they have to vote not their fears but their hopes.
Wow.
If we can do that, change will come to Zimbabwe. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, just being able to do that in a sustained way.
Very cool. So if I understood correctly, Zimbabwe has a very high literacy rate. Does that hold true even in the rural sectors?
Yeah, that's the thing that breaks your heart. So just a few weeks ago, we were in a rural community, and you see these young men who have graduated from high school, and they're sitting under trees, just drinking some traditional alcoholic beverage because they have nothing to do. We are one of those countries which invested so much in the education of our people. And in fact, for a Zimbabwean family, people would rather go without a roof over their heads than not educate their children. So what you find is that some people will have, say someone has built houses and then all of a sudden their child now has to go to college. You actually find these people selling their houses, to pay for their children's tuition. It's unbelievable. Education is, second to faith. Education is so highly prized in Zimbabwe. It's unbelievable. And what it has produced is the most literate country in Africa. And even right now, we keep on churning these high school and university graduates in a country where there is 90% unemployment. So you actually have some university graduates on the streets selling, hawking telephone recharge cards or fruits and stuff like that, which is really just very, very troubling. So yeah, we're a highly illiterate country, but unfortunately, there are no opportunities for those young people to work. That's part of the reason why we have a huge diaspora. It is estimated actually that about 3.5 million to 4 million Zimbabweans are outside the country, and these are some of the most educated people who could be doing so much to actually build the country, but there's no opportunity for them. If you go to South Africa, you're going to find a lot of institutions in the financial services sector run by Zimbabweans. You go to the UK, in the NHS, it employs a high number of nurses and doctors from Zimbabwe. And all of that is our loss as a country. So it's a real challenge.
I hear you. We'll be right back after this 30-second word from our partners.
We get asked all the time, why Fellowship Home Loans? What makes us different? Hey everyone, this is Mike.
And this is Brian of Fellowship Home Loans.
Many things make us different, but what do our clients say?
We can close your loan in weeks, not months like other lenders. They love our low rates and, of course, our personalized one-on-one approach. And always, our clients get 2 months off from their mortgage payments and $1,000 back at closing.
Our motto itself, mortgage lending guided by Christian principles. Call us today at 800-804-SAVE or online at fellowshiphomeloans.com.
So how are some ways that God has shown up in your campaign so far?
God shows up every day. Talking to you is one of those ways, just making new friends, who encourage our hearts, every day. God has really shown up. I mean, all the things that we have done in the last couple of years. Sometimes when you're actually doing something by faith, it takes you actually stopping and then calculating and saying, what is it what does it take for us to have done all these things, But because, God is showing up every day, sometimes you really don't realize the magnitude just of the miracles and, just how God has providentially shown up in the things that you have done. So even when we talk about the needs that we have going forward, we share that because the Lord really wants us to share those things. But we're truly grateful for every need that He has met up to this point. But let me tell you, the most powerful showing up is the kinds of people that have joined our platform. There's a young lady who is part of us. Chantel is an example. I mean, quit her job. I mean, to do this. She had a great job, but says, this is a cause that I'm responding to. We have so many others. We have a young lady who worked for the World Health Organization who has been part of us, left her job. I mean, left to work with an international organization to come to join this team which had nothing but faith and the belief in the cause.
Wow.
And we have so many stories like that. We have another young man who was in the UK who worked for an international, banking institution in his home and is one of our executives. We have a vice president who worked in China and UK and some other places as a senior finance executive. And they believe in this. That's been, for me, the most wonderful miracles that we have seen. It's the people that God has sent our way.
I love that. I love how my mentor always says that sound is first in the kingdom. And so when God spoke and then you saw light, and John heard the trumpet and then he turned and saw, and the apostles heard the mighty rushing wind and then they saw the flames of fire. And you were faithful when God laid that on your heart to speak out. This is a worthy cause. What do you always say? Is there not a cause? Is that what you say?
Is there not a cause? Yeah.
Is there not a cause? And so you were faithful to put that sound out there, and then the people came to surround you. You were able to see that. So, man, let that be all the way to the presidency. I love that.
Amen. I received that.
So good. In your manifesto, you said, "We will build a great nation by unleashing the incredible potential and promise to the Zimbabwean people." So what do you want the world to know about Zimbabwe and its potential?
So, I believe that the greatest gift that God gave to Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwean people. They're so resilient. I don't know if you realize that in 2008, we actually had a historic, I mean, if I tell you the rate of inflation in Zimbabwe at that time, it was in the billions percent. You'd say, wait a minute, that's not possible. How does a country even function, with that rate of inflation? But the miracle is, how do people even retain their sanity? How do they remain, calm and collected and fight through that, without descending into the horrendous kind of dysfunction that we've seen in other places. There is something about that, and for many years people would say this, and they would say it in a negative way. I don't know how you Zimbabweans can put up with a person like Robert Mugabe. How can you, But I look at it another way too, that God gifted our people with an incredible strength, incredible strength. And until leaders rise up, we say, okay, now let's direct this strength towards, building our country. Then that potential is not being used properly. And also, what we just talked about, we are a highly, highly educated, highly creative people. And in some ways, you can be so creative, that it can work against you in some ways, because you find ways to survive, where you should actually challenge the system, but you find ways of going around the system and so on. And man, if you only unleash that creativity and just that resilience, if you direct it properly, then you can do anything. You can build anything. So we have tremendous potential. And recently, in November, I'm sure you heard about the events that led to Mugabe resigning. And the unusual thing about that is, there should have been an incredible amount of violence because of, just the frustration and pent up anger at 37 years of just dysfunction. I remember going around that time, and no store was looted. There was no violence.
Wow.
People were out on the streets in their hundreds of thousands, and there was no violence. And man, I looked at that and I said, man, what a gift! If we could only use that, our respect for human life, and so on. If we could just take all this, our education and all of that. And here's another thing. We are a highly Christianized nation. Over 80% of Zimbabweans are Christian.
Wow.
My goodness, what potential, So I always say this when I encounter fellow believers, and I say, you remember what happened when Jeremiah went to God and was complaining? It's in Jeremiah chapter 12, and he had all these complaints, and he was angry at God, and he just felt like, then he was, and then the Lord said to him, if you have run with the footmen and they have wearied you, how are you going to contend with horses? And I looked at that and I said, wow. So what God says to us as believers is that you are extraordinary people. I have fearfully and wonderfully made you. You can't just be wearied by footmen. I have created you to do exploits. So imagine turning that potential, the potential of our faith, people who believe that nothing is impossible with God, and directing it towards actually rebuilding our country. Man, we will build an incredible country if we can harness that.
That's so good. What I hear in that is that there's been a strength that has been bound in endurance, but that you are going to empower and employ in the establishment of the new thing.
Yes.
So good.
Yes.
I love that. Another one of your quotes that you kind of touched on was a simple phrase that you used that just grabbed my heart when I was reading your manifesto. You said, "We are an uncommon people." And I think you beautifully illustrated that just now.
Yes, yes, and you know it's the thing that is really unfortunate a lot of times is that you know you can have so much inside of you, but you're living in abject poverty. You can have so much inside of you. You can have the power, and some of this is where this can be a challenge because some of it is cultural. You know, when we were growing up, if somebody came up with a good idea and they were using a different implement, which, for instance, for cultivating the fields, it was instead of using a hoe that you're holding and bending over, and so on, you're using a little machine to actually, cultivate the fields. You know, people would look at that and they'll say, well, you're trying to be, you're trying to be special, they would pull you down. No, that's not that. Those are not the implements that we use. So sometimes, culture makes you proud of things that you shouldn't be proud of, and it actually kind of nullifies the potential that you have. You know you can do great things, but there are certain cultural expectations which stop you from rising up to be who you are. And I really truly believe that we are an uncommon people, and there are certain things that we should address even in our culture and become who God wants us to be, and adopt a kingdom culture which releases us to do exploits.
Come on, man. It's so good. So I'm fascinated by the economics of nations, and you have said the value of any future Zimbabwean currency will depend upon the reputation of the leaders and the institutions that will manage our economy. I love that quote. Would you expound upon that?
Yeah, well, the value of any currency, that's why you find that if something happens, someone gets fired who was a finance minister or something, well, the value of a currency plunges, particularly if you were somebody that was trusted by people. Or you appoint someone who people have confidence in, all of a sudden your currency is going up. Why is that? I mean, the person has hardly worked. It's just the trust, because so much of what happens in economies is based on trust. So if you trust leaders, if you trust their stewardship of your economy, then it even brings in investment. It bolsters the value of your money. Good leadership is good economics. And I like telling people that one of the most powerful economic decisions that we'll make for Zimbabwe is choosing the right leadership. Leaders that the people can trust, leaders that investors can trust, leaders that business people can trust, and then all of a sudden there's this international goodwill and local goodwill for you, and that just really bolsters your economy. I'm in Zambia actually today on a business trip, and I was amazed by the difference. Just across the border in our own country, I don't think we even trust ourselves enough to have our own currency. Well, right now we transact everything using the US dollar. Wow. Because what we did, the financial mismanagement of our currency in the 2000 to 2008 period was unbelievable. I mean, we actually showed that we were illiterate, our leaders were illiterate when it came to managing money. But also, they showed that they were irresponsible, So it led to us actually, killing the Zimbabwean dollar. And now we actually don't have our own currency. And that's going to be one of the challenges for any leader that comes in, because the people trust the management of the U.S. Federal Reserve of its currency, even Zimbabweans do. And they would rather trade in the U.S. dollar. But here's the problem. It actually overvalues our exports. Because it's such a strong currency, everything is expensive. So it really, really undermines our ability to sell our own produce because of the valuation of the American dollar. So then the need then is for a leadership that will be so trusted that they can actually even bring back our own currency. That's going to be a challenge,
Wow.
Those are some of the unusual situations that we face as Zimbabweans.
I just want to say to my listeners that you can't get that kind of information just anywhere. That's some depth of insight there, and so thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So what would you say is God's heart for your nation?
Wow. So, one of the things that convicted a lot of us is that, we would be sitting wherever we are, pointing fingers at the leaders who are in Zimbabwe and saying, you see how they're messing up. And we came to that moment when God said to us, nature abhors a vacuum. That's how I created things. If good leadership is not there, it will, some kind of other people will take the place of good leadership. The people who are there, they will. And I truly believe that God's heart for our country is for those who have been exposed, his children, those who understand who God is and what he intends for our own country to step forward and actually really build our country. One of my favorite countries is Israel. And I'll tell you why it's my favorite country. Every time I meet someone, or anyone comes into the leadership of the Build Zimbabwe, I always talk to them about a book called The Startup Nation, the story of Israel's economic miracle. And the stories that are in that book are just incredible. Ben Gurion, at the beginning of the building of the State of Israel, says that, what we have to do is to turn the Negev desert into a garden. If we can do that, then we'll succeed as a nation. And, you fast forward 50 years later, and here's a country which is 65% desert, which actually exports food. You go figure. I mean, so you create your own comparative advantage even when you don't have natural resources. Why? Because you were created fearfully and wonderfully by God, and you're not supposed to survive at the whims of nature. And I truly believe that is God's heart for our country as well. That we should prove, we who are the children of God, that we're extraordinarily created, we're extraordinary human beings, and through God there's nothing impossible. And Zimbabwe, I truly believe, will become one of the leaders of the African continent, and very shortly, with the right leadership, will actually be a great country, not just by the standards of Africa, but of the world. I believe that's what God wants for us.
That's so good. And I know even just from your story about how there were all the hundreds of people on the streets, and yet there was no crime, no rioting. Man, that's something that the U.S. can learn from you guys right now. So I know that you guys have so much more that we could benefit from and glean from who your people are and your culture and the wisdoms and insights that God has placed specifically in the heart of your people.
But isn't that what's exciting, Dub, about life? That, we have, each one of us, been given a different perspective of hope. We could learn so much from you, and you could learn so much from us. And, we bring those different perspectives of hope. We will build the kind of world that God wants us to build. So, it's exciting to realize that. It's a different perspective of hope. I don't see the whole thing, but what I see, I can actually bring to my brothers so that we can complete each other's worldviews, So I'm excited about the opportunity to do that.
So good, man. So what can our listeners do to be involved and to follow your progress?
So one of the things that your listeners can do is go to our website, which is www.buildzimbabwe.org. And just see what we're doing. And if anyone wants to reach out, there's actually they can reach out to us through that, or they can write directly to info@buildzimbabwe.org. If they just want to connect with us. What we are doing is not just political. We are actually involved. Put together a trust which is called the Zimbabwe Nation Builders Trust. And what we have really desire to do is to be a blessing to these Zimbabwean people, and not just to use them as people we are trying to get to vote for us. So meeting some of the day-to-day needs of young girls, for instance, female hygiene products and so on and so on. Those are things that we actually want to do, and leadership training, and voter education. There's many things that we would like to do, and would love to partner with people in the United States and sometimes we say to people, you can help in all kinds of ways. And people say, well, can you tell me specifically? And I say, look, anything that you can actually be compelled by God to give would help somebody who doesn't have anything. That's, people can connect with that, with us through the website. And we'll let you know once you send us an email, exactly other areas that you can participate in as well.
Perfect.
And also invite us to come and tell our story. It never hurts to actually have people come to your churches, to come to your institutions and so on. We would love to do that. Come to tell our story and share with us what our needs are. Let me just say this also real quick, if I may.
Yes,
Isaiah 37 verse 3 is a scripture that compels me a lot. It says, they told him, meaning Isaiah, this is what Hezekiah says, this is a day of distress and rebuke and disgrace, is when children come to the moment of birth and there is no strength to deliver them. There are many times when we're pushing, and we feel like we don't have any strength. And one of my fears is that we'll get to the moment of the election and we won't have enough strength. So I ask our brothers and sisters to just pray for us for strength. And also, if there's anything that they can do, Proverbs 3:27 says, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to act. So maybe there's some things that the Lord maybe there's somebody listening even to this podcast who actually have, the means. How are elections done? It's money and resources, and we pray that the Lord would move on the hearts of people who have means and would help us, because to be honest with you, we think this is a historic moment for Zimbabwe. We as believers have been given an opportunity by God to actually reshape a country, and it would be really, really sad if we don't have the strength to finish what we started.
Absolutely. And I just want to speak to the listeners myself for a moment and just say we've got a unique opportunity to partner with a gentleman who understands that he's a son of God, that wants God's heart for the nation. He's operating as a father to his people, and he's sensitive to the Holy Spirit. And so whatever you can do to get on board and to help with this, share this podcast, and maybe it'll hit the ears of the individual that has the resources if you don't. And if you do, please give. And let's just see what God can do in the country of Zimbabwe. So, Dr. Manyika, thank you so much for your time. Do you have any parting words for our audience?
Hey, you know what? I've found a brother. and I truly, truly enjoyed this, and I look forward to doing it again. I feel like I've known you forever. Yes, but thank you so much to you, and thank you so much to the listeners. For spending time with us today. All I would say that in your own sphere of influence, do whatever you can to make the world a better place, and don't wait to be sent. Isaiah, he was, it says that he went in the temple and he heard these voices, the Lord speaking to his own counsel, saying, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And there was never at that point an indication that the Lord was saying but he heard this and he volunteered himself and he said, "Here am I, send me." I really believe that there are many times when the Lord is asking that question and we can hear him, but then we say, "Hey, send up." I think it's time for us. It's time for us to step up and do the right thing. And thank you so much for this opportunity, Dub. I'm really, really honored, and thank you, listeners, for spending time with us.
So good. The honor is ours. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Are You Real Government? Throughout the week, don't forget that you can check out any number of the family of Are You Real podcasts. Michael McIntyre with Are You Real Business just released a great podcast on the importance of coachability. Check that out. And until next week, it's been Dub, it's been Kingdom, and it's been real.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Are You Real Government? For in-depth resources, show notes, information on today's discussion, or to connect with your host personally, please visit areyoureal.org. While you're there, be sure to check out the other podcasts in the Are You Real family. Until next time, thanks for keeping it real with Are You Real Government?
Hey everyone, this is Mike.
And this is Brian of Fellowship Home Loans.
Many things make us different, but what do our clients say?
We can close your loan in weeks, not months like other lenders. They love our low rates and, of course, our personalized one-on-one approach.
Call us today at 800-804-SAVE or online at fellowshiphomeloans.com.